My name is Sanjeev Sharma. I'm IBM's CTO for DevOps Technical Sales and Adoption. I'm a client-facing resource at IBM. So I've spent the last few years working with our customers around the world, helping them adopt DevOps, understand what DevOps is, and figure out how to adopt DevOps at scale at large enterprises. And that's kind of the theme of today's panel, right? How do we adopt DevOps at scale? So we have some very interesting speaker panelists today. I've known a couple of them for a while, and Aziz I just got to know a few days ago, but a wide variety, right? So what we're going to do is, I have a tendency to butcher people's introductions. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. What do they do, and give a few sentences like I did of their background. And something maybe about the size of and distribution of your company, because I think that's the challenge which a lot of people care about. Are you doing it for something which is large and not a small co-located team? So Aziz, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi. Good morning. Afternoon. I'm Aziz Shamin. I work at GitHub. I work in the field services team. So I'm like Sanjeev. I'm customer facing as well. So I go out and visit customers and help them build solutions for DevOps, specifically targeted around GitHub Enterprise or GitHub.com as a platform. I've been doing tech for almost 20 years, and DevOps before I knew it was DevOps. So that's me.
Hi,
Raghu.
everybody. This is Raghu. Can you hear me? No. I can hear myself.
He was there. Speak louder.
Oh, speak louder. No. Can you hear me now? I switched to Sprint.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So this is Raghu. I'm Raghu Raman. I work at Kaiser Permanente. I manage a team that builds APIs and integrations. We build integrations which are all consumer-facing or public-facing for all the digital channels. And primarily, it's kp.org, our mobile apps, and some of the other channels. We have a few mobile apps that are there. I'd like to call what we do as the electricity of kp.org. We are the electricity that drive and power the website of every interaction that a member has with healthcare, how they seek an appointment or fill a medication or whatever that is. That's what we do. I think Sanjeev, you'd said about the size of the company. We are Kaiser KP as a whole is approximately 200,000 employees, physicians, workforce, and so on, and KPIT. In terms of kp.org or the digital channels, we are roughly in the neighborhood of about, I would say, close to about a couple of thousand people, contingent workers and employees put together across different organizations. So that's what we do, and we can talk about DevOps, hopefully, as to what we're doing and some of the challenges we face in scaling.
Thank you. I'm John Comas. I'm manager of platform DevOps for NBCUniversal. We are a very large multinational company with multiple lines of business, and we've been rolling out our DevOps SDLC throughout those lines of business. I've been doing release deployment and application lifecycle for over 13 years. So like you, Aziz, been doing DevOps before the industry term was coined. So I'm very happy to be here and chat about DevOps with all of you.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. And just a warning to all the speakers. This is being recorded, so if you ever plan to run for president in the future, do not want it on record. Now's your chance. So let's start, right? I've hosted this kind of panels at all kinds of conferences, and usually we spend the first, I would say, fourth of the conversation defining DevOps, right? Now, we don't need to do that here, right? If you're still, after a day and a half of being at this event, trying to figure out what DevOps is, time to go home, right? So, I think we'll skip that part and go straight into challenges and adoption lessons learned, right? But before Stephen Covey wrote a book, right, 7 Habits, and one of the things he talks about in the book, and I think it's the first habit, I don't remember, is begin with the end in mind, right? And we talked about this when we did we did a webcast a few days ago with Gene Kim. How do you measure success, right? So when you embarked, so it's a two-part question, right? When you embarked on this journey of DevOps, once you had decided to call what you were doing DevOps and said, I'm going to embark on this journey, more than just making my project successful, I'm going to embark on this journey as a transformation effort, right? I want to make my company successful using this thing called DevOps. Part one is, what was the compelling reason to act? Was there one which made you say, we got to do this, and we got to do it at scale, at an organizational level? And number two, once you decided that, were there a set of metrics or KPIs which you said, these are what we're going to use to measure success? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go for it.
So, Sanjeev, I just want to make one comment that I think about defining DevOps. Many people seem to have different definitions of DevOps. At NBCUniversal, we defined it through the 5 C's. So continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous testing, continuous feedback, and continuous monitoring. So we put all of those together and developed a single workflow that our developers can utilize. So from checking in the code to final production deployment, they're all utilizing that same workflow. One of the drivers for DevOps for us was that we wanted to develop code faster and more efficiently, remove bugs and errors that would plague builds and deployments, and at the same time reduce cost. DevOps allows us to meet our continuous delivery ideals, mostly in that we need to respond to ever-changing business requirements. If we're on a traditional deployment platform where, let's say, we set a rule, we can only deploy twice a week, we're missing potential opportunities that can come up. So the idea that DevOps gives us this synergy between development operations, it allows us to push code out faster than ever before. And in the industry, we want to make sure that we're always on top of the latest that's coming out. So being able to respond to the business is key. As far as metrics go, mean time to resolution for a work item is key. We measure our build and deployment frequency. We measure our build and deploy success rate. And with DevOps, it's increased by almost an order of magnitude, which is incredible. Quality metrics. How many times does it take for a release to pass the quality assurance process? We found that through DevOps, utilizing continuous testing and then also shift-left testing practices, the release is spending much less time in the QA process, which of course reduces the sprint cycle time.
Sure. I think I'm going to say I'll start with what you said. DevOps has a different meaning for every organization, just like how Agile has a different meaning, and every organization has a hybrid way of how they think Agile is or how they think DevOps is. The driver for KP is primarily time to market. There are 3 or 4 things that are happening fundamentally in the healthcare industry. Regulatory change that is happening because of the Affordable Care Act. There's a huge demand, pent-up demand for individual consumers to control their health. This was not the case for Kaiser a few years ago, where majority of our health plans were group health plans and it was not needed. Suddenly, now it is a lot of individuals are buying, which means I need to know every dollar and cent and cost of every treatment and every appointment and everything. I need to understand all of it. That was not Kaiser's field a few years ago. That has changed. One other piece that has fundamentally changed, and it happens all the time, digital disruption. The amount of frameworks that are there, the number of tools and technologies that are available out there are suddenly there. So we say, hey, here's an organization which has pent-up consumer demand. We are structured in a way to deliver healthcare in a particular way. We have organizations or functional units that deliver care in a specific way, and you need to make all these multi-speed organizations deliver a digital capability. That is a huge task to say, how are you going to do it? So we used to have, I would say a few years ago, we used to have releases, and we still have releases where a large number of features go out in a release, and you say, okay, it's one release, you'll have 4 big releases a year or so on. The customer cannot wait for 8 months to see his bill. he's going to be saying, I need to know it on my mobile device. Suddenly the paradigm has changed and saying, okay, how are you going to get features which are in a pipeline that have to go to market sooner? So DevOps really is driving how you're using whether you call it DevOps or not, there's a pent-up demand. How do you do frequent releases? How do you get functions and features out into the market on the digital channels quicker? That's driving it. What are the challenges in that? There are several challenges like any large organization that tries to do it. A technical solution is the easiest part. How do you take a technical solution and fit it into an organization that is already existing with their existing processes, or how do you change that? That's where I think the challenge is. I'm just going to deviate a little bit into some of the challenges and say, I want to go to a small story to give you the context of what are the challenges that anybody is going to face. This is about a guy who does a prayer in his house with his family. And during the prayer, they close their eyes and they're just doing the prayer. And it so happens that a black cat comes along and picks up the offerings and walks away. And when he opens his eyes, his prayer is all messed up. He says, oh, we need to do this all over again. And it's an elaborate process. Takes the cat, puts it in there, puts it in a corner, puts a basket, puts a stone, continues the prayer. So every month or fortnight, whenever they have the prayer, they get into this ritual of taking the cat, putting it there, putting the basket, putting the stone, and continuing it. Life goes on. Father dies, cat dies, and the son continues his tradition. And he comes to the prayer and says, oh, we need a cat. Go into the street, find a black cat, bring it in, put the basket, put the stone. This is going to it's not a joke. This is happening in every organization, whether we like it or not. We do not know the black cats. We do things because that was how it was always done. We do this because we are not sure why it was put in the first place. We've forgotten why it happened in the first place. And when you have a large organization, certain actions happen at a point in time to solve something tactically. That becomes precedence. And say, oh, you don't ask those questions because that's how it's always done. So the notion is you have to challenge some of the process and say, what was the reason we never did these big releases? What was the reason we need to take care of this? Some of that tribal knowledge is forgotten, and you need to be able to understand that and then say, okay, do I have a technical solution or a process to mitigate that problem? I think that's one of the challenges in adopting anything for time to market and say you want to do something rapidly. That's where I think. In terms of KPIs that you asked, Sanjeev, for us, it is cost. The more time we have multiple teams working on a release, that's time that the feature is not available. We are burning dollars as much time as possible, as and when people are still in the release. We need to be able to get things shipped out of the door as quickly as possible. That's our KPI.
Excellent. So and then Aziz, if you can hold on for a second.
Sure.
Right? I love the story, right? And we all have those black cats. It's wonderful. And I call it cultural inertia, right? Organizations over time develop cultural inertia. And if anybody asks a question like, oh, that's the way we already did it, that's a symptom of cultural inertia. Or I can't do it till John agrees to it, that's cultural inertia. In fact, I don't know if you guys follow Dilbert, but there's one going on, stream going on right now where Dilbert is paying other people to get buy-in because his boss says you have to get buy-in from everybody to approve this, right? Yes. And I'll approve it, right? So how do you overcome that cultural inertia, right? How do you go and make people question or get people to question why they are doing something? Because it is not usually their decision. It usually involves two parties, and they're both waiting for the other one to change.
Yes.
How do you address that? Or have you figured out, have you cracked that nut yet?
I don't know if there's a silver bullet to it because it is a combination of conversations and collaborations with the teams involved. So it definitely means putting yourself in the shoes of the other organization to see what is it that you need to do to be successful? What are your pain points, and am I doing a handoff to you that makes life easy for you? If you are responsible for building and deploying, that's your responsibility, and you've done it a particular way. How can I make sure that I give it to you in a way that resolves something for you? You are spending X amount of time doing things a particular way. Do you think doing it a different way will help you? If you don't have that conversation and show the benefits, we are going nowhere.
Benefits to both parties.
It has to be a win-win. It cannot be one solution. It works for me, it cannot work for you. Because at the end of the day, if it is a pipeline that has to go through multiple organizations or multiple teams, you need buy-in. And it's not, I would say, using a stick approach, but it's a persuasive approach to say the value of being able to do it. Here is a problem statement. It needs to be built and deployed in 2 hours, not 2 days. Okay, what is it that the solution you have today doesn't work? So what is it that you can do? So I have a solution, will that work for you? If not, let's mend it to make sure it works for you. At the end of the day, the solution and the process needs to work for the consumer. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of resistance and it'll just create more silos than ever. So it's, yeah.
Absolutely. Next, Aziz.
So it's interesting. We have people from very large companies in the room, very large companies on stage. GitHub's a fairly small company of 600 people, but we see a lot of the same perspectives, right? I hear, why are we moving? Why are we changing? The reasons are time to market, lowered costs, retention, happier employees, better code. I think ultimately people just want to do a better job at the job that they have. And to Raghu's point, a lot of these internal frictions or cultural inertias that develop come around when there's a lack of understanding between people that are trying to achieve a common goal. And the patterns that we see that break down the barriers between dev and ops or test and ops are only facilitated by technology, right? Technology can create a space for new things to happen, but it doesn't facilitate, it doesn't change the culture, it doesn't make new things happen. So breaking down those silos is about creating a common understanding. The constant creation of understanding is the definition of communication that I've heard before. And I think that's the thread that seems to pervade the companies that come and ask us for help in delivering some sort of cultural or technological transformation inside of their organization. As far as KPIs to measure it, I think there's 2 orders of KPIs we have to measure. You have to measure the thing that you've already been doing and the way that you've been measuring it, right? Changing your KPIs while you're changing your thing is not going to lead to an outcome where you're going to be convinced of your success, let's say. And then there are secondary order KPIs you should measure. And the first order are things like cost and time to market and how much revenue you're generating from a business, or retention, or how quickly it is to hire people because you set up an organization where people want to come and do the best work that they possibly can. And then there's second order, so those are all first order. Second order KPIs are things like how well are we actually changing the way we're doing things. And I think disassociating those 2 is very important because, again, changing the thing that you're measuring while you're changing the thing that you're doing is going to lead to confusion.
Can I add one more thing about? So one of the other challenges, I think, at least at Kaiser and for it's probably going to be there in large organizations, is how do you adopt at scale? It's okay to do a pilot. And transforming something, whether it's a process or standardization of tools, you are fixing ship while in the ship. Yep. The ship is already there. You have to continue to fix it. It requires a lot of positive energy. You need to find team members who are willing to be positive transformers, so to speak, and say, it is going to get better. It's easy. There's always going to be teething problems. There's always going to be mishaps in the way. How do you overcome that and say, yes, the goal is there and you need to go over that curve and get critical mass and get buy-in and say, yes, it's worth it. Because if you don't buy in that positive energy and the saying, yes, it makes sense, it's very easy to have, I'd say people just say give up and say this is yet another initiative that's just going to fall flat on its face. Let's not bother it. Let's just do it. How do you continuously pursue it and keep going at it?
Yeah, and I think that's another example of cultural inertia, right? Because there might be a culture of failure to say, transformational projects never work at my company. They've always failed. Right. How many times have I've had $1 for every time I've gone into a company and they said, oh, we tried Agile, it doesn't work. Really? So that's very interesting, right? And it's good because I'll segue into that point and then come back to what I was going to talk about earlier on. But by the way, guys, if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to raise your hand. The reason I don't have a tethered mic is because I can rush down and pick up your question, right? So if you have any question which you want to ask our panel here, this is an interactive session, right? Let's go for it. I don't have a script.
And Kaiser people can't ask.
Okay. GitHub, Kaiser, and NBCUniversal people cannot ask their own people the questions. Right? They can ask other ones. Okay. That's fair. And IBMers can't ask me nothing. Okay. So So let's go into this. In fact, my best example of making that attempt, Raghu, to overcome cultural inertia, I went to this, it was an insurance company, and their VP gave me a t-shirt, right? The VP of DevOps, that's by the way, new titles also come with DevOps, right? And the t-shirt said, everyone is responsible for delivery to production, right? And he said he gave that t-shirt, of course, to all the developers, the QA folks, all the ops people, but then he went a bit further. He sent it to the CFO and said, if you don't approve budgets on time, you are responsible for delay to production. He gave it to the latte machine, vending machine maintenance guy and said, if the coffee pot is broken and my folks have to walk to the latte shop, you are now delaying deployment to production for 20 minutes. He gave it to the janitor and said, if the restrooms are not ready and people have to go to a different floor, right? And he said his wife stopped him from giving it to significant others at the company picnic, right? So saved a bunch of marriages and relationships there, fortunately. But now that's to me an extreme case, right? But you're talking about, Raghu, and I'll start with you, about getting people to change. How do you find those people? How do you create that? We at IBM, we created a DevOps center of competency, right? Where we attracted these change agents, right? Did you do any technique like that, or did you do anything to identify those change agents who were willing to roll?
I think there's a combination. We did have external consultants who had the philosophy and the understanding of how Kaiser works. That was one part of it. But we also had certain people saying, we're willing to take the risk to make these changes. We want to make these changes. And I think there's definitely a set of leaders, managers who strongly understand that time to market makes a difference, or it is important. It's no longer acceptable to say, oh, if it doesn't ship, that's fine. There are consequences. Patient safety is going to happen there, or maybe somebody else is going to pick up the ball and run. It is going to impact something. So we are at a point where all the investment work, whatever is happening, is very, very visible, right from top to bottom, to say this is the program we are embarking on. It's not just a side project that needs DevOps. This program, there are a few large programs that we are embarked on, which are to transform how we deliver digital healthcare, and say this is what it takes, and you need to change ways to deliver it. If you can deliver everything using your existing processes, power to you. But it's not going to be possible to meet the demand that is out there in the market. So what are you going to do to change? Whether you call it DevOps or Ops Dev or Waterfall or Agile doesn't make a difference. The end consumer doesn't care what technology process you used to book his appointment. He wants to see it and done the right way as quickly as possible. How are you going to enable that? So once you have those change agents, say, what can we do differently? What are incremental changes? Let's try it in one service. Let's try it in these two APIs. Let's try it in this release. Incremental changes to prove that it actually works. And then you can scale.
And that success then breeds success,
yes.
Right? Because you can say this is adding value.
And suddenly people say, I don't want to be sitting on a troubleshooting bridge. I'm done. I don't want to do that. So suddenly you say, my job is done. Because now you say, come and give me the release notes, give me this. No, it's already there. It's done.
Excellent.
That changes the behavior and the way things move.
So John, same thing for you, right? I mean, I'm actually very familiar with, a little bit more familiar with what you all have achieved, right? Another unique thing I think about your organization is a highly distributed, but also you've grown through different companies coming together, right? Each one of which comes with their own culture.
Sure.
Each one of us comes with their own technology stack, right? So when you were trying to scale, were you limiting yourself to say, okay, we were this company before, we do it this way? How do you overcome that challenges, right? Because through mergers and acquisitions in large companies, that's another artificial barrier that is created amongst organizations, between organizations.
So that's a multi-point answer. So first of all, we have multiple companies joined into one. Every company, and even drilling down further, different app teams have their own ideas of what tools they should use, what processes they should use. And it's very hard to convince everyone to join one platform just for the sake of joining one platform. So there has to be a categorized need as to why everybody has to follow a single path to production. I think that for us, one of the easiest ways to convince app owners, and those app owners that are most willing to join with our efforts, are those that have felt the most pain. those that can't seem to get releases out on time, those long sprints, those 5-hour deployment windows in the middle of the night, the outages that occur after every deployment, right? Those teams that have experienced that want to come onto our platform. So, instead of having the mentality of, okay, you join in with us or else, it's convincing them to come on board with their own desires. And we've been most effective at implementing DevOps with application teams who are asking us for it.
So they already have a compelling reason to act. They've identified you're offering them a ready-made solution.
Absolutely. And fundamentally, we're a shared operations. And for example, we have one data center, and we can have 3 different lines of business in that one data center. So a single application team saying that they want to use their own process, well, okay, you want to use your own process, but how is that affecting others? You could potentially be causing outages to a shared data center. So the argument that you're operating in a vacuum really doesn't hold true.
Things will break.
Yes.
Right. Excellent. So Aziz, coming to you, right? Similar question, but I want to spin it for you, right? Because you're in a similar situation to me, right? That you see a lot of customers and you look at their stories and you get a kind of a great point of view of observing their journey, right? Is there any example you can share where you saw a customer or a client of yours or somebody you partnered with overcome that cultural inertia, and was there any specific action they took, whether it was setting up some kind of a center of excellence or creating a platform, and then if you build it, they would come kind of approach to addressing people's challenges?
There's no silver bullet, like Raghu said, right? I think the answer is all of those things. Centers of excellence are a great pattern of bringing people with common passions together. And the passion is usually we want to do a better job, we want to make life better, we want to cause less outages in a shared environment, which is a big deal. The other things, where do you find people to populate these centers of excellence for DevOps? I tell them, look to see if they have a GitHub account. Ask them, are you working on projects outside of work to further the art of your field? But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Not everybody has time to spend on open source projects or anything. Maybe they serve as peer mentors, right? I mean, a lot of people who populate centers of excellence are self-selected or selected by their peers as excellent resources that they can go to, who are forward-thinking and want to make life better for other people. But the answer is all of these things. You have to do at least a little bit of all of them. What John mentioned, the way we describe that people who have a large barrier towards success, we call it friction at GitHub. And a large part of what we go in and help people resolve is finding those places of friction that cause a barrier, high energy of activation, if you want, if you're a physicist, to get to production. And a large part of that is removing communication. I'm going to go back to that first point. A large part of it is removing communication barriers, right? Sometimes the friction occurs because there's a cumbersome process in place, but many times it occurs because you just don't know the best way to accomplish a task. And creating these centers of excellence with cross-organizational peers in a place where they know, they're visible. You can say, oh, I have this thing, I don't know how to do it, or I'm not sure I'm doing it the right way. Let me pull in an expert who definitely knows more than I do and is incented either through some intrinsic value or extrinsic motivation to help me.
Excellent. And I think the point you made about self-selection is very important, right? Too many companies are struggling because they're trying to treat everybody in the organization the same and saying, all these people will go learn this new technology. They're assuming they're all eager to learn and change. Right. That's not true, right? And I remember I was working with a large organization the same way, and we wanted to set up the center of excellence. The first meeting we had was like 6 people. I was the speaker, invited guest speaker, and we ordered pizza, right? Now they have weekly meetings where there's always somebody, they have a backlog of people who want to come and demo the cool new technique they built. Maybe show their, their urban code deploy process, or show their, new microservice they've built, or new monitoring or log analysis technique they're using, whatever it might be. It's almost like a mini DevOps day is happening.
Hack weeks.
Hack weeks,
Hack
right?
weeks are great.
I know the Cap One
Who
guys
shows up?
have a lot of those. Some of them are, I met them earlier. So let's kind of switch tracks here, right?
You wanted a
Question? Yes. All right, John.
Hi, just a quick kind of variation on that cultural question, which is, I go to a lot of places, and it seems to me that the people within the organization, everybody aspires to, the best way to job security is to be a deep expert in some technological, topic or area. And people identify with that technology more than they identify with the whole organization. And in my experience, what you're really after in a DevOps culture is, you don't replace deep expertise, but you also need people willing to learn new things, willing to share their deep expertise rather than hoard it. My question for you is, have you recognized this issue, and have you taken any steps to do anything about it culturally in your organization?
Anybody want to take that?
I can try. Let me give it to you with an example of what happened at Kaiser. This is exactly about a year and 2 months ago, September 23rd or 24th, I remember the date. We had a period of approximately 4 to 5 weeks of instability in the dev environments, where you had about 14 or 15 Scrum teams trying to converge into a given release environment. And the API, one of the common APIs and services that were being used were also in active development, which means people were overstepping each other, and it led to a lot of instability. And the one way of saying is, okay, we're all dead in the water, and we can continue to argue, and we can continue to have this friction. And yes, like how you said, that skill of saying, how do I deploy and make it stable, and what's a stable piece of code, was known by a small set of people. So I said, how do you get out of this? So one thing we said, we're going to stop the train till this is stable. There's no point us getting on the train derailing. It's not productive. For the next 1 week, there's no code going out there. We're going to have a process where there's going to be a sandbox, where active development, and then we'll have the stable. It's always going to take us 3 days to come from stable to this place. The SLA is 3 days. Take it or leave it. What now there was a rebellion with the team saying, we are used to having it on the fly. You're asking me that every time I make a change to the API, you're going to give me 3 days notice. They said, you have a choice, stability or quality or velocity. Pick what you want. And very soon, he said, since September 24th till date, not a single outage. It had to take that cultural shift and say, whatever knowledge was there, and said, you want to do it, this is impacting multiple teams. We have to figure this out. And yes, now we are at a point where saying, okay, we are introspecting and saying, we've figured out the stability problem. We know how to get code stable out there. Now let's figure out internally how to make that 3 days to 3 hours or 3 minutes or whatever that is. That's a different problem. But that's continuous improvement and saying, okay, how do we get this problem time to market? So I think the answer to your question is, you have to empower individuals to say, you have some expertise. How are you going to automate it? How are you going to bring stability and serve our consumers? So that's where I would go.
So one of the challenges we've had is that developers, application owners are familiar with particular tools. They may be an expert, let's say in Rally, and another team may be experts in Jira, and another one wants ZenHub. Every team has their particular technological expertise, and they like to stick with that. If you multiply that across a large organization, well, we could wind up owning every single tool in existence and having multiple instances of that tool. So one of the things that I've tried to do is to talk about capabilities rather than just tools. So we have agile management tools, we have bug and issue tracking tools. And we try to convince the developers that it is essential to adopt a single SDLC with a single set of approved tools. Now, That being said, of course, for different technologies, we'll have different tool sets, but we try to not create a situation where everybody wants their own path to production and their own methodology of how we should get there. That greatly complicates the process and then breaks down the idea of DevOps. So,
can I just add to that? At Kaiser, we are notorious for having every tool in every organization. It's because they all evolved at different points in time. Funding was available at different points in time, and people have stood up different systems. And once you stand up a system, taking it down and doing a migration is expensive. So you tend to stay in that tool for a long period of time. And here are the bridges, APIs. Write APIs to make those systems talk to each other. If you are using Jira and I'm using Rally, okay, every time you open a defect, let's have an API go and put a ticket, because that system and that organization only understand Jira tickets. You want only Rally. Okay, invest in that. Invest in having, even if you have disconnect or disparate sets of systems, make them talk to each other. And then it'll solve 90% of it. And then suddenly you'll say, the cost of doing is this, we may as well just do this. You'll find some bind and say something and say, oh, we are doing the same thing and this is causing a little more overhead, why don't we try a different path? But unless you have motivation to have the systems talk to each other, you're not going to have the assembly line flow through.
So I think that's a perfect segue to start talking about tools and technology, where I was going anyway, right? So unless you want to add something, right, Aziz?
I think they covered it. I wondered if you had a particular technology in mind when you asked that question, or.
I just see it as people identifying with their, I'm a Java programmer, I'm a database programmer, I'm a security person, rather than saying, I have expertise in something, but what I'm really about is the company. To me, more people in the company need the big picture, and for a long time, we acted as if that was a waste.
Right.
So I think the resolution there are two of them. So, and they're a combination of what my colleagues up here have said. So the first is changing the perspective of somebody who thinks that they're a technical expert in a specific product as opposed to a set of technologies or a practice, right? I think that's up to leaders in the room and managers in the room to change that person's perspective on what they have to offer the company as expertise. And then the second piece is when they're changing those products, if your products are changing, if your technologies are changing, then my colleague Greg, sitting in the front row here, says these tools need to be ridiculously extensible, right? And if you're picking tools that aren't, and you're stuck with a tool that isn't, these are computers. We can make them do things that we want, right? So find ways for these technologists that you have that have sort of pigeonholed themselves into one way of thinking to provide that kind of contract or communication via API to other pieces of the system. And realize, the premise of this is you don't have multiple systems. You have one system. If it's not communicating with itself in all the multitude of ways that it can, it's a broken system. Fix it.
Absolutely. And at IBM, we talk about something called open toolchain, right? Where we realize that any organization we go into has made investments in either open source or third-party tools. Even though the tool is open source, if you're using it, you got stuff in it, you adopted it, there's an investment made, right? So how do you have this open tool chain where you have that end-to-end traceability and visibility? The end goal is visibility, right? You will have trust if you have visibility, right? So let's talk about those tool chains, right? So John, why don't we start with you, right? And I have my iPad here, so if you want to draw, if you're brave enough to draw in real time and want to show, talk a little bit about, you said you built a platform, right? What is that platform, and what were you looking for in terms of its characteristics when you were building that platform?
So when we were investigating our release deployment technologies, we wanted a single platform that could handle all of the technologies that we have at NBCU. And we have them all, trust me. So we centered around the IBM Urban Code Suite, and that's really our driver for the DevOps process. Our bug and issue tracking tools connect into Urban Code, as well as our continuous testing tools, static code analysis, unit testing, code coverage. We've been working extensively for DevOps for the database with Datical. We've also been working with CollabNet on continuous monitoring and feedback. And the whole goal is to have everything driven through this single workflow that is driven through a repository commit hook. The developer checks in their code to GitHub or TFS. Those are our primary repositories. And it's really a hands-off process from there. The CI workflow takes over, and they get instant results. I'll give you an example of one of our largest applications, our TV scheduling app. They have frequent deployments that involve a front-end release with a database dependency. And so traditional manumatic process, I like to call it, is they'll do an automated build, drop it into an environment, and assuming that's successful, they'll send it over to the QA team, and it could take a few days to get a result back. And at the same time, they'll send the database portion for any DDL changes, let's say, to the database team, and it'll take a few days there. So let's say there's a QA problem, which we all know there are never bugs in the code, and there's possibly an issue with the DDL changes. Well, that particular release, you've probably had 2 weeks until you're all said and done. With the workflow that we've created, driven through Urban Code, the developers are getting feedback immediately. They can see the forecast of their database release, if it's pass or fail. And if it fails, stop. Don't deploy a release to the environment that's going to break it because the database portion is not there. So this saves tremendous amount of time, and it's really enabled us to reduce our sprint cycle times dramatically.
Excellent. Raghu, same question if you want to.
Sure. I think one of the things we did at Kaiser was any release cycle would go through several stages or several connected environments. An environment really is several stacks. So you would say dev, QA, integration, load, regional testing, pre-prod, mobile. So it's about 7 environments before it even looks at, you're saying, ready to go for prod. And we will do code drops between those environments with very specific things that are done. Black Cat, there are very specific things done in each environment, and it was done at a point in time. We have not yet changed that behavior. Why can't you do all of that in this environment? Why do you need to do this? Looking at the Black Hat, we understand, okay, this was the reason why you're doing it. Okay, this is the connectivity that you have only in the regions in this place. You don't have that connectivity here. Okay, that's the reason. Can I not change that connectivity on the fly and do the testing? Yes, but we have not done it. So things like that of saying, how can you automate? Where I was going with that is we have a process where it goes through 7 or 8 environments before it looks to production. Each hop is approximately 2 to 3 days. So by the time you get feedback from one environment or the other, you have lost cycle time. How is it that we can do that faster? How can we automate it? How can you do all of that automation up front? So we are trying to move all of the testing automated, all left, shift left, and try to do as much automation up front so that it's actually clean code that is going out there. So that is one thing that we are trying. The second thing that we are trying to do a lot of automation around is we've had traditionally a practice of building and deploying with different tools or different scripts in each environment because they were meant for something very specific. We'll say, we want to solve that problem so that the build and deploy is a matter of minutes. Solve that problem because that is machine time. That you don't need, say, have config files, have something else and say, let's make these are low-hanging fruits that we take for granted in a .com. It's not low-hanging fruit in an organization like Kaiser, which has a lot of tribal knowledge built into the system saying you don't know what you don't know, and if you don't know what the connectivity is, you're stuck for days together to find an SME. You don't know who controls it in back-end environment. So those are some of the challenges. Understand why it was done and solve that through automation. And say that is some of the things to say how do you reduce cycle time is a lot of understanding of why you're doing something and then automate it.
Looking for the waste.
Yes, what is the reason you're spending,
yes.
where are you spending time?
Excellent.
That's key.
Excellent. Any follow-up questions? Yes, over there.
So,
You made me walk.
I'm pretty loud.
That's good. I like it.
I got a question about, so this kind of goes into the breaking down environments and also the So are your organizations at a place where you're calling your teams, everyone on that team's an engineer? If so, what was the lessons learned breaking down those silos to get to that point? And if not, are you trying to get there? What are your challenges?
So to clarify, are you saying have you gone to a single definition irrespective of somebody's skills where you call them an engineer, or do you still have functional roles within the team?
Exactly.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, anybody?
Sure. Let me answer the first question, and I'll answer this one. To go back to Sanjeev's question, so the way we do deployments is a little interesting, and it's related to your question, so I'll hit it too. And I won't talk about our customers because our customers, they build pipelines that are specific, and I think everybody should build pipelines that are specific to their business goal, right? If you are deploying a SaaS application, you're going to have a very different pipeline than if you're packaging software for delivery to customers, or if you're building microcontrollers or embedded systems for healthcare devices or autonomic car systems or whatever you're building.
Voting machines.
Yeah, voting machines. You're going to have a different delivery pipeline for all of those, and you should build a delivery pipeline with that thing in mind, with that goal in mind. We have two cycles that we really care about. Ours is GitHub.com and GitHub Enterprise, and they have two different user bases. They have two different use cases. So we build a lot of our technology to optimize delivery for those two specific end goals. So as far as feedback, I love your 5 C's, by the way. Those are great. My favorite one on there is continuous feedback. I'm a big believer in feedback in systems. And we built our delivery pipeline to optimize feedback to our developers and to our operational engineers. And we really don't make much of a distinction between those two people these days. We have people that have skill sets that are focused on writing software, and then we have people whose skill sets are focused on taking that software and making it usable by large amounts of people. Either that means performance or getting it onto 130,000 servers or whatever the number is, right? They're two different skill sets. They're both engineers. We require both of them to follow good engineering principles, right? Design principles, operating within constraints, etc. Testing, we write as little tests as possible. I think you want to write as many tests as cover your test cases, your requirements, but then nobody freak out. We test in prod, right? We have 15 million users hitting our website. We'll throw the code up there and see how it works. We're gentle about it. We don't give it to all 13 million at the same time, but we do test in prod. After we test in our testing environments, after we test in our branch labs, and we've written all this stuff on our engineering blog, so I won't belabor it, but our pipeline is built specifically for GitHub, and when we go to customers and we talk to them about their delivery pipeline, we ask them what their goals are, right? What is your goal? Who are your customers? How often do you need to deploy? What kind of risk are you willing to take on? And I think you have to build delivery pipelines with those goals in mind. And you have to structure your engineering teams so that they understand what those goals are and how their skills, and they're all engineers, they can be applied to that. Even our product managers are engineers. Our project managers are fairly technical as well, to come from engineering backgrounds.
Yeah, but I'll take that from a different angle and say that it depends on the size of the company and the culture of the company and the organization. If you have, in certain cases, it will be required for you to have the segregation between those who build it and those who run it. It might be required by law, right? By compliance requirements, right? That you have that segregation. So I see personally, in my personal experience looking at all the companies, that we are ending up with 3 kinds of teams, squads, whatever you want to call them, right? There are the dev teams, right? These are people who just focus on writing and testing code. There are the ops teams who are just focused on running stuff, and they're agnostic to the workload, because the workload might be a packaged application, it might be a custom application they built, or it might be a mobile app, whatever it's, a mobile backend, right? They're running a workload and they're focused on running it. And what you are calling engineers are the third category, what you might call a DevOps team, which straddles all the worlds, right? They might have full stack engineers in there. But I can tell you from my experience, and I'll let John and Raghu give their opinions. I think that team of which has that skill set in large enterprises is extremely small. The percentage of people who can fit that balance, because we are not skilled that way today, and it's going to take a long time to get to that in large organizations, right? If you're a startup, you got a fresh field, and you can go hire anybody you want. That's all you should have. Everybody's an engineer.
Sometimes it was by necessity. We didn't have the luxury to hire an entire
Absolutely.
office.
If you have 5 guys in a latte shop starting a startup,
Right.
everybody's an engineer.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the submarine mentality, right? Even the cook on a submarine, I don't know if anybody else from the Navy knows how to navigate, how to take over a certain part of the operations, because if somebody dies, he's a backup for somebody, right? It's a small, you can't get, when you're underwater, you can't get a replacement, person show up.
Usually it's sleep. We don't usually plan for death in our engineers. We usually, it's like...
I come from a family of all military people. So my analogies, those which are not sports related, are usually war related. So one of the two. And to me, the overlap is tremendous between war and sports. So John, Raghu, take that on, right? I know you, given the complexity of your organizations, I would love to hear your answer.
Yeah, I think we spoke at lunchtime and we were talking about it, the domain expertise and the functional knowledge in certain areas of the full stack. It is not possible. It'll be a challenge to find a person who spans end to end. It's just not possible. It's not skills. It's more than that. And then how do you scale that as a team? How are you going to have a person who understands F5, firewall, data power, APIs, front UI, databases, the backend system, the backend APIs, the backend systems, and the backend domain, and it just goes on. The stack never stops. And each of this is a team that is managing that and delivering in that sphere of excellence, if you want to call it. How is a DevOps person can only think about automating and making sure code is connected through that. They cannot become functional experts in that. And we are just talking of one feature. And then you'll say, oh, this is appointments. Oh, this is appointments for one kind of facility and one kind of region and one kind of department. And now you do it 700 times. And then you do it 1,000 times across the country. And then you do claims. And you say, oh, you need another person who understands end to end. Yes, you can find people and train them. It's not a scalable model. So I think we are, for a company like Kaiser, I think it's going to be pockets of people who understand certain domains. But going back to DevOps, I think there's a lot of value in it, in the saying, how does a developer write code knowing how it's going to operate in production? For example, I would say in my dev environment, I'm going to do with 2 clusters. And if I have isolation and I can have a silo where I do not know the number of JVMs it's going to run on in production. Oh, this is going to take, I need a notion of saying this is going to be taking 50 millisecond responses, what I need to write it for, and it's going to be there with 16 JVMs. I need that as an input in my development to understand that's what it is there.
That's a visibility question.
The visibility question, and not
else.
only is the visibility part of it, how can you simulate that in your testing? Can you have an X factor and say, oh, I'm going to do my regular regression testing with 10x, 1/10 the load or 100th the load, and see how can I extrapolate that? If you are not doing the 100th or a factor X here, then you don't even know what is going out there. So it's very expensive to have environments that are production-like in every dev slice. It's just not possible. It's just, Kaiser is not built to do all of that.
Deploy to production, see? That's the answer.
Yeah.
Test and prod.
So if you see somebody else's medical record, great. Or somebody sees yours, that'll be nice. But yeah, the risk, and to your point, there's a very different appetite for risk when something goes out to production, just because it's healthcare and PHI. That's a very different model. But to the point of saying how much can you automate or how much can you bring visibility into environments and automation into a lower environment with a factor and saying, yep, we have done this, then it makes sense. If you have not done those basic things, then you always have a challenge of saying, this is dev, and then it's throw over the fence and it's ops. How do you bring that closer?
So a couple of things. My DevOps team, I've always encouraged them to basically be the all-size-fits-all engineer, try to learn all the technology stacks. That's a very unique skill, and frankly, it would be impossible to try to roll that out across an enterprise. When we work with our app teams, we try to embrace that there's a diversity of skills. I've never tried to tell somebody who's the database engineer, oh, you should learn more about .NET coding. When we have a stand-up call for a particular application sprint, we try to get everybody on the call because it's that synergy of the experts that really gets the knowledge sharing going and familiarizes everyone with what's happening. The DBA can tell us what his challenges are, and the developer can tell us, well, you know, these are the various issues that I'm seeing in this particular release. Testing is aware, everybody's aware, and they can use their own individual expertise to really contribute to the overall success of the project. You know, when it comes to production deployment, I like to have so much confidence in the release going up to the production deployment that at that point we don't need all the experts. The production deployment is almost like a passing event. We have the Urban Deploy tool scheduled to push out the code. It does it. There's an automated validation check and it's done. Pre-DevOps, you had to have everybody on the call to ensure that whatever problem occurred could be fixed quickly. So, major shift in culture.
And just to add to that, sometimes it's just a limitation of what you can and cannot do. Doing a deploy during live traffic has a lot of challenges along with it. Yep. It's not a technical challenge. There are considerations about capacity and do you have everything built out? Can you withstand the load with one data center? Mm-hmm. What can you do and what can you not do? So it's not just a technical solution of doing a release into production. The technical piece is easy. It's the business decision. Can you afford to do it? Can you do that? And that's a question. And do you want to do it? What's the cost of doing releases in the middle of the night versus during the day? During the day, oh yeah, we need 2 more data centers, and then yeah, you can do it. Versus what's the cost of doing it at night? Yeah, it's a few more nights. Yeah. How many times are you doing it? So having the pattern, it's a cost-benefit analysis of just not technology, the process and people involved around that as well.
It's a business decision.
Yes, it is a business. As much as a technology, it's a business decision. Do you want to do a live deploys to production during the day, as in when you want? Or does it need a village to come together?
I think it's very important to add to this. When we develop code for an application, it's very important that operations has a say at the development phase because operations can give valuable feedback to the developers. So for example, if you have an application that has a very large production load, they may need to develop DDL that's going to be able to support that. If a developer creates a situation where the database is doing a table scan, let's say, and that's not caught in testing, when it goes to production, it's going to cause a performance issue. It's going to have to be redeveloped. So having the silos broken down where development and operations come together, at that early stage, we can much more easily determine how to develop code that's going to be deployable. If it's a 24/7 website that can't go down, you better make sure that the code you're deploying is releasable into that. If the code you're deploying requires an outage, it's not going to work. We're going to have to go back to square one. So.
Right, so it's a availability question, it's a risk question, it's an ability to roll back question. There's a lot of other questions which need to be answered. Sorry, go ahead.
Some of these are features, right? So I think one of the most telling or enlightening interactions I had maybe 7 years ago with a team, I was watching a development team discuss the new software that they had written and how they were newly packaging the application. And they had happened to invite a few engineers in the room, operations engineers, and the operations engineers were sitting there listening quietly, and they started having this side conversation about all the changes they needed to make in order to be able to deliver this new application. And some of the developers caught wind of the conversation. They said, well, what are you guys talking about? And they explained the complexity of the different environments and how they needed to be able to, change the way they've been operating in order to facilitate this new model of application. And the developers all said, well, that's ridiculous. We can change our application, and you don't have to do any of that. And to that point, some of this deployment can be a feature of the application. Some of this can, availability is a feature, deployment is a feature, stability is a feature, usability is a feature, documentation is a feature, right?
Absolutely. So we're wrapping it up, right? So let me end it with one question to the three of you, because we have just like 2 minutes left, right? And I know everybody has other sessions to go to, and hopefully there's coffee outside also, which everybody really wants, right? No? You're wide awake? I'm cold in here, so I really need some coffee. So let's talk, one of the things which I do not go see a single customer today and talk to them about DevOps without a question coming up around containers and microservices, right? Now, I have a joke about this, which I cannot repeat in public. If you see me one-on-one, I'll tell you about it. But hey, I might run for president, so who knows? Hardly anybody's really doing it, right? I mean, I remember sitting through a 40-minute presentation by a customer to me about what they were doing with containers. And I asked him, the gentleman, what percentage of their production applications will be using containers 18 months from today, and he said the number is under 5%. So I'm like, why are you wasting our time, right? Why are you wasting your time, right? Even if I help you improve 200%, the rest of your ship is still moving at that, slow pace. Are you, very quickly, adopting containers or microservices or both? Is that in your radar, or do you see that having an impact today in your ability to deliver, or is it still futures?
Absolutely.
John, you said first. You spoke up first.
No, containerization's on our 2017 DevOps strategy, absolutely.
So still 2017, you're not in production yet?
Not in production yet, but 2017 is very close.
Yeah, I know. You all 50 days, yes.
Yeah.
I think containers, we have just done proof of concept. It's not ready for prime time because of the cost of doing what it needs. We have a lot of automation and a lot of tooling that needs to be solid before we take the next step. We are not yet there.
And at GitHub and your customers, what are you seeing?
We're seeing customers asking about it. I don't know how many are using it in production. I suspect not many. The technology is still nascent. As far as microservices go, I think building a microservices application from the ground up, I don't know how many people have been successful at it. GitHub is a monolithic Rails application. As we find optimizations that can exist inside of the application, we spin them off as services. I don't know if they qualify as microservices, and they're running in computers, which are kind of a container. So
right. I mean, you Google what is a microservice, and you'll get all the answers you want, right? So great. Thanks, you guys. Let me wrap it up with this. Please come by the IBM booth. We have IBM's Bluemix Continuous Delivery, which is a new capability we've released. We'd love to give you a demo. Come check it out. We have a bunch of sessions still left. One of the things we did not get into, we ran out of time today, is the world still runs on mainframes. I have a colleague of mine. He says for 26 years he's been showing the slides, which is an article which he read 26 years ago, which said the mainframe is dead. And he's been showing it in his slide deck for 26 years. So if you want to find out about how to do DevOps on mainframes, tomorrow morning we have IBM and Walmart. I think they use a few mainframes, talking about how they do DevOps on mainframes. And then we have a question about teaming, a lot of questions today about teaming. We have one of my colleagues, Anne-Marie, speaking about how we at IBM have adopted the squad model, right? We're giving away some goodies, so come by our booth, fill out this puzzle, and you're in the running for goodies, and submit. We have IBM. Last but not the least, IBM Interconnect is coming up, which is our premier conference in February. The deadline to submit abstracts is this Friday. So if you have some interesting ideas, please submit them now. Please, yes. I see somebody nodding. Yes. Where's Randy? He's taking abstracts right here, right now. Okay, you can submit on his iPad. So with that, I'd like to thank the three of you so much for the sharing. Please give them a big hand, guys. John, Raghu, it's been a great pleasure.